Jake Turner woke before dawn, like he had every morning for the past 15 years on his small ranch in Montana. The sky hung dark blue, just beginning to brighten at the edges. He pulled on his boots and thought about the task ahead. His mare Daisy was slowing down, her joints stiff with age, and he needed another horse to help with the heavy work. A man named Garrett from the edge of the county had called the night before, saying he had a strong gelding for sale. Jake didn't ask many questions. He simply agreed to drive over and take a look. The decision felt ordinary, practical, nothing more than another ranch errand. The dirt road leading to Garrett's property stretched long and narrow, lined with trees that leaned toward the earth as if tired from years of standing. Jake drove with his window cracked, letting the cool morning air settle on his face. He thought about the horse, imagined training it, letting it run free across his open fields. The drive felt peaceful, quiet in the way mornings always were out here. When he finally reached the property, something felt off. The house looked worn and empty, the barn standing alone in the distance with peeling paint and sagging boards. Jake parked his truck and knocked on the front door. No answer. He knocked again, called out politely, but the silence remained thick and unsettling. Maybe the owner was working in the barn. Jake walked across the overgrown yard, his boots crunching through dry grass. As he approached the barn, he noticed the door slightly open, a thin line of light cutting through the gap. He pushed it wider. The familiar smell of hay and old wood filled his nose, but there was something else underneath it, something stale and wrong. Dust hung in the air, moving slowly in the sunlight that slipped through cracks in the boards. The barn looked normal enough at first. Tools hung on the wall, bales stacked neatly in the corner, but there was no horse in sight. Jake walked deeper inside, calling out again. His voice echoed softly and faded into nothing. Then he heard it. A sound so faint he almost missed it, like a breath or a whisper, weak and broken. Jake froze. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't an animal. It sounded human. His heart began to pound as he turned toward the darkest corner of the barn. His eyes adjusted slowly, and then he saw her. A woman sat on the ground, her back pressed against the wooden wall, her knees pulled toward her chest. Her clothes were torn and dirty, her face pale and gaunt. Her hair fell in tangled strands over her eyes, and she looked up at him with fear so deep it made his stomach twist. Then he noticed the chain fastened around her ankle, bolted to the wall with a rusted metal ring. Jake's breath caught in his throat. For a moment, the world seemed to stop completely. He had never seen anything like this, never imagined he would stumble into something so dark. His voice came out gentle, almost a whisper. "Hey, it's okay. I'm not here to hurt you." The woman tried to speak, but her voice was barely there, broken and trembling. Jake stepped closer, slowly, carefully, not wanting to scare her more than she already was. When he crouched down a few feet away, he saw the bruises on her arms, the exhaustion in her eyes, the way her hands shook in her lap. "Can you hear me?" he asked softly. She nodded weakly. "I'm going to help you, I promise." She blinked slowly, as if she wanted to believe him but was too afraid to trust. Jake's mind raced. Whoever had done this might still be nearby. He looked around the barn again, suddenly alert, every sound magnified. "Where's the man who lives here?" he asked quietly. The woman's voice cracked out a single word. "Gone." Jake didn't know if that meant gone for good or gone for the moment. Either way, he knew time mattered. He studied the chain. It was old and rusted, but thick. He tugged it gently, testing its strength, but it didn't budge. He needed tools. "I'm going to get something from my truck," he told her. "I'll be right back. I promise I'm not leaving you." Her fingers curled slightly, holding onto his words. She nodded, the smallest motion, but full of the trust she was trying to give him. Jake stood and walked quickly toward the barn door, scanning the empty yard as he moved. Every instinct told him to hurry. When he reached his truck, he grabbed the small toolbox he always kept behind the seat. His hands shook, not from fear for himself, but from the weight of what he'd found. He couldn't leave her. He wouldn't. He hurried back inside. The woman's eyes followed him, relief flickering across her face. Jake set the tools down beside her and inspected the chain again. He reached for a bolt cutter, adjusted its grip, and positioned it around the metal. "This might take a moment," he said softly, "but I'm going to get you free." She watched him with tired, hopeful eyes, her breathing uneven but steady enough to stay still. Jake worked quietly, squeezing the cutter around the chain. His hands strained, the metal resisting at first. He adjusted his angle and pushed harder. The barn remained silent, except for the soft clinking of metal. Finally, with a sharp snap, the chain broke. The woman let out a shaky breath, and Jake saw tears gather in her eyes. He dropped the broken chain to the ground and moved carefully, helping her sit up straighter. She was lighter than he expected, weak from hunger and fear. He placed his jacket gently around her shoulders. "Can you stand?" he asked. She tried but winced, her legs too weak to support her. Jake steadied her with one arm, lifting her carefully. She leaned into him, trembling not from fear anymore, but from exhaustion. He guided her slowly toward the barn door, step by step. The sunlight felt warmer now, like a promise that she was leaving something dark behind. As they reached his truck, she looked up at him with uncertain eyes. "You're safe now," he said. "I've got you." She whispered her name so softly he almost missed it. "Emily." Jake repeated it, reassuring her that he heard and respected her. "I'm going to take you somewhere safe." He helped her into the passenger seat, making sure she was comfortable, and closed the door gently. As he started the engine, he looked at the barn one last time. Something inside him changed in that moment. He had come for a horse, but he knew now he was meant to be there for a completely different reason. Jake kept checking his mirror as he drove, making sure no one was following. Emily sat quietly beside him, wrapped in his jacket, her hands held close to her chest. She looked tired and weak, but there was something else in her eyes now. Relief. It was the first bit of safety she had felt in a long time. Jake didn't speak much at first. He wanted her to rest, didn't want to pressure her with questions. After several minutes, he asked gently, "Are you okay? Do you want some water?" Emily nodded. Jake handed her a bottle from the cup holder and helped her hold it steady. She took a slow sip and let out a quiet breath, as if even that small moment brought her comfort. As they approached the main road, a truck appeared behind them, kicking up dust as it moved fast. Emily's breathing changed. Jake noticed instantly. "That's him," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jake didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on the mirror, calm and steady. "It's okay," he said softly. "I won't let anything happen to you." The truck behind them sped up, then slowed sharply, as if the driver wasn't sure who was in Jake's vehicle. The moment stretched painfully long. Then suddenly, the truck turned onto a different road and disappeared behind a cluster of trees. Emily let out a shaky breath and leaned back into her seat. Jake reached over and pulled his jacket tighter around her. "You're safe with me," he repeated, his voice firm but warm. When they finally reached the small clinic in town, Jake parked right at the front. Emily hesitated before getting out, her fingers gripping the edge of the seat. Jake walked around to her side, opened the door gently, and offered his hand. "You're not alone," he said quietly. She looked at him for a long moment before placing her hand in his. Her fingers were cold and light, but she held on firmly enough to show she trusted him. If this story touches your heart, hit that like button and share it with someone who believes in kindness. The nurses at the reception desk immediately noticed them. Emily's pale face and weak steps told a story without needing words. One of the nurses rushed over, speaking softly. "Come with me. We'll take care of you." Jake stayed close, walking beside Emily as they led her into a small examination room. They asked Jake to wait while they checked her injuries, but Emily's eyes followed him anxiously. Jake noticed and reassured her. "I'm right outside. I won't go anywhere." Only then did she let the nurses guide her inside. While waiting in the hallway, Jake paced slowly. He wasn't nervous for himself. He was worried about her. He replayed everything in his mind. The quiet barn, the chain, her fear, the truck behind them. Every piece made his chest tighten. After some time, the door opened and the nurse stepped out. "She's stable," the nurse said gently. "She just needs rest. food, and time to recover. She asked if you could stay for a moment. Jake entered the room. Emily was sitting on the bed now, wrapped in a soft clinic blanket. Her cheeks had more color, and a glass of water sat on the nearby table. She looked up when he came in, her expression softer than before. "How are you feeling now?" he asked quietly. "Better," she whispered. "Thank you for helping me." Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with emotion. It had likely been a long time since anyone had shown her kindness. Jake offered a small, warm smile. "Anyone would have helped," he said, though deep down, he knew not everyone would have cared enough to look deeper into that barn. Emily shook her head slightly. "No, not everyone." The sheriff arrived soon after. He was an older man named Harris who greeted Jake with a nod and spoke to Emily with patient gentleness. "There's no rush," he said kindly, "but when you feel ready, we'll take your statement. Whoever hurt you will face consequences." Emily nodded slowly. The sheriff asked simple questions, letting Emily answer in small pieces. She told him the truth without details too painful to repeat. She spoke about feeling trapped, afraid, isolated. Sheriff Harris listened with empathy and wrote down only what she could manage to share. When it was over, Emily leaned back against her pillow, looking exhausted but relieved. "It feels strange to finally say some of it out loud," she murmured. "You weren't alone this time," Jake reminded her. She smiled faintly. "Thank you." The afternoon passed quietly. Emily asked about Jake's ranch, what he did, what kind of animals he kept. Jake told her simple stories about the land, the early mornings, the way the sky changed color depending on the season. Emily listened with a soft smile, as if imagining a place far kinder than the world she had known. "It sounds peaceful," she said quietly. "It is," Jake replied. "Anyone who stays there usually feels safe." Emily hesitated before asking, "Do you live alone?" Jake nodded. "Yes, just me and the animals. Not many neighbors nearby." Emily thought about that for a moment. "That sounds comforting. No noise, no fear." A nurse stepped in and told Emily she was doing well enough that she could be discharged the next day. Emily's relief was mixed with anxiety. "Where will I go?" she whispered. Jake saw the fear in her eyes, the kind that came from having nowhere to return to. He cleared his throat softly. "If you like," he began carefully, "you can stay at my ranch for a while. The guest room is small, but it's quiet, and no one will bother you there." Emily stared at him, shocked. "I don't want to be a burden." "You won't be," Jake replied with calm certainty. "I wouldn't offer if I didn't mean it." Emily looked down, her eyes softening. "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything right now," Jake said. "Just know the offer is there." Hours later, as evening approached, Jake stood to leave. "I'll come back tomorrow morning," he said gently. "And whatever you decide, we'll figure it out together." Emily looked at him with gratitude that carried more strength than words. "I'll be here," she whispered. "And thank you again for everything." Jake nodded softly and walked out into the cool evening air. The sky glowed as the sun lowered, and he knew tomorrow would mark the beginning of something important. Not just for Emily, but for him too. The next morning, Jake arrived at the clinic before the sun had fully risen. He had woken early, his mind already set on seeing Emily. Inside, the halls were calm. A nurse smiled and nodded toward Emily's room. Jake knocked softly. "Come in," Emily's gentle voice answered. She sat on the edge of the bed, already dressed in clean clothes the nurses had provided. Her hair was tied back neatly, and she looked much stronger. When she saw Jake, her face brightened. "You came," she said softly. "I said I would," Jake replied warmly. "How are you feeling today?" "A little nervous," Emily admitted, "but also hopeful." "That's good," Jake said gently. "Hope is a strong thing." Emily hesitated before asking, "Is your offer still open about staying at your ranch, just until I find my footing?" Jake didn't pause. "Of course it is," he said with absolute sincerity. "You're welcome for as long as you need." Emily looked down. visibly moved. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know how to repay your kindness." "You don't need to repay anything," Jake replied gently. "Helping someone isn't a debt. It's just the right thing to do." When it was time to leave, Jake stood by her side, steady and patient. Emily carried only a small bag the clinic had given her. As Jake started the engine, Emily glanced at him shyly. "I've never been to a ranch," she said softly. Jake smiled. "Then, today will be your first." The drive was peaceful. Open fields rolled past them, dotted with trees and small hills. Birds flew overhead, and the morning sun grew brighter, warming the earth. Emily watched the scenery with quiet wonder. Each mile took her farther away from fear and closer to something like safety. When they reached the ranch, Emily's eyes widened. The wooden house stood proudly in the center of open fields, surrounded by tall grasses and gentle hills. Horses grazed peacefully in the pasture, their tails swaying slowly in the breeze. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Jake felt warm pride. "Welcome," he said quietly. "This is home." Quote. He showed her the small guest room. It had a soft bed, a window facing the fields, and a simple wooden dresser. Sunlight filled the room, making it feel warm and restful. "I know it's small," Jake said, "but it's peaceful, and it's yours for as long as you need." Emily walked inside and touched the edge of the bed, tears gathering in her eyes. "It's perfect," she said softly. "I haven't felt this safe in a long time." Emily spent the next hour resting, letting the quiet of the ranch settle into her heart. The silence was not heavy here. It was comforting. Later, she joined Jake outside. He was fixing a fence, working calmly. When he saw her, he paused and smiled. "Feeling better?" he asked. She nodded. "Much better. I want to help. I need to feel useful again." Jake understood. Sometimes healing wasn't just about rest. It was about doing small things that reminded a person they still had purpose. He showed her simple tasks. Carrying a feed bucket, brushing Daisy, walking slowly through the pasture. Emily moved carefully but with quiet determination. The horses seemed to sense her gentleness and approached her without fear. Emily's smile grew brighter as she brushed Daisy's soft coat, feeling a calmness she hadn't known in months. Jake watched from a distance, admiring the way she connected with the animal so naturally. He felt something warm move in his chest. Trust, respect, admiration, and a deeper care he didn't fully understand yet, but welcomed quietly. As evening fell, they sat on the porch together. The sky turned orange and pink, painting the fields with soft colors. Emily hugged her knees close and breathed in the peaceful air. "Jake," she said softly, "thank you for giving me a place to start again." Jake looked at her, his voice steady and warm. "You're stronger than you know. This ranch is big enough for both of us. You're welcome here for as long as you want." Emily turned her head slightly, meeting his eyes. For the first time, she felt that her future wasn't something to fear. It was something she could shape again with patience, trust, and the quiet strength of someone who had survived the hardest days. Days turned into weeks. Emily grew stronger, her hands steadier, her smile brighter. She helped Jake with the animals, learned to ride Daisy, and spent long afternoons watching the hills turn gold in the sunlight. Jake found himself looking forward to her presence, the sound of her laughter, the way she spoke gently to the horses. He had been alone for so long, but now the ranch felt fuller, warmer. One evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset, Emily turned to him. "I think I'm starting to feel like myself again," she said quietly. Jake smiled. "I'm glad." She hesitated, then added, "But I don't know if I ever want to leave." Jake's heart skipped. He looked at her, and for the first time, he let himself feel what had been growing inside him for weeks. "Then, don't," he said simply. Emily's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" Jake took a breath. "I mean, You've made this place feel like home in a way it never did before. And if you want to stay, not just for now, but for as long as you like, I'd be happy to have you here." Emily's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of hope. "Do you really mean that?" she whispered. "I do," Jake said, his voice firm and gentle. "You belong here, Emily, with me." She reached out slowly, and Jake took her hand. Her fingers were warm now, steady, no longer trembling. Comment below what moment touched your heart the most. They sat together in the quiet, the sun setting over the hills, painting the sky in shades of hope and new beginnings. Emily had come from darkness, from chains and fear, but she had found light again. And Jake, who had only been looking for a horse, had found something far more precious. He had found someone to share his life with, someone who understood the value of kindness, trust, and second chances. In the months that followed, Emily became more than a guest. She became a partner, a companion, a presence that made every morning brighter. They worked side by side, laughed together, and built a life rooted in the quiet strength of two people who had both been lost in different ways and found each other. One spring morning, as they stood together watching the horses run free across the fields, Emily turned to Jake. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," she said softly. "Feel what way?" Jake asked. "Happy," she whispered. "Truly happy." Jake smiled and pulled her close. "You deserve every bit of it." Quote. And in that moment, surrounded by the wide-open sky and the gentle hills of Montana, Emily knew she was finally home. Not just in a place, but in the heart of someone who had seen her at her weakest and chose to stay. Someone who had walked into a dark barn looking for a horse and walked out with a purpose far greater than he'd ever imagined. The ranch stood quiet and peaceful, a sanctuary for two souls who had found healing, hope, and love in the most unexpected way. And as the sun rose higher, casting golden light across the fields, Jake and Emily stood together, knowing that their story was just beginning.